Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Alex Duval, to accept our, invitation again. I really appreciate.
You're very welcome. It's always a pleasure to join you.
Yeah, Mr. You are an expert on the conflict of, mostly, to my understanding. So my question to you is, conflict that arise thereof invariably, focus on the state mostly. And because that is where power is concentrate and access to power ensure access to resource. So state power is both the goal of conflict and the means whereby it wage. Can you shed on light these two dialectic, the conflicts and the states, and put in the context of Ethiopia, please?
I think what you say is absolutely correct. In almost all cases, there are a few exceptions. Actually, it's interesting that even in the case of Somalia, during that long interregnum in which there was no state, the conflict was still framed by the idea of the state, by the assumption of the resources and authority that would accrue to those who managed to establish some form of state power. So, in a way, the example of Somalia is a country without a state. You even see how the state was shaping the conflict during the 1990s and 2000s. In the case of Ethiopia, it's very much also the case. And the Ethiopian case is particularly interesting because Ethiopia is a unique state in Africa in that it was formed by an indigenous African process of conquest and consolidation in tandem in negotiation with external powers. So the Emperor Menelik established the state pretty much within the boundaries that within which it has existed for over 100 years. And he did that both by using his sovereign authority and the resources he was able to mobilize, but also his diplomatic capabilities. And Haile Selassie was very much the inheritor of that. That, of course, led to a situation in which the Ethiopian state in the aftermath of World War II in the UN system was struggling to establish itself as an equal in the world, not because it didn't possess the symbols and the legal accoutrements of sovereignty, but because it didn't have the political and above all the economic clout to establish itself truly as an autonomous player. And what Haile Selassie was particularly skillful at doing was negotiating enough space for him to carve out some autonomy. Mengistu Haile Mariam, of course, then aligned himself with the Soviet Union, and under the EPRDF, the state again returned to that in its external relations, to that system of trying to triangulate amongst the different powers, the global powers, in order to create autonomy, while standing on its head the hierarchical socio-political order that existed during the imperial times and creating the federation. So the federation is a very interesting arrangement in that it is almost by definition a work in progress. It's something that is not definitively settled because the requirements for implementing its key provisions depend upon political conditions that are hypothetical. Let me explain what I mean by that.
Okay.
The Ethiopian federal constitution does not vest sovereignty in the central executive. It's very clear that the Ethiopia consists of the aggregate territories of the of the member states of the federation, and sovereignty resides in those entities, which is unique in the African context. So it is a particular legal formulation of the state, and intrinsic to the existence of those entities is the right of self-determination. But that is a right that can only be exercised through a sort of democratic process that is almost impossible to achieve, because it can only be legitimately exercised when that democratic process and the center has broken down. So you get this extraordinarily complex situation in which the state authority in Ethiopia is of necessity contested. And the question for Ethiopians, really, this is getting back, a long-winded way of getting back to your starting point. The question for Ethiopians is that contestation going to be a civic contestation or a violent contestation?
Okay, as you know, Mr. Alex, Ethiopia is a mosaic country. There is a different, nation and nationality that reside there. And Waal in 1969, he was saying that Ethiopia is a prisoners of nation and nationality. If we compare, this nation-state concept developed in Europe, during the feudal system, and according to one of scholars, they say here, the state and nation are concepts that evolve along separate lines, that converge to form what we now call the nation states. The state has evolved through different forms in various parts of the globe, from city-states at one end to vast empire of the others. Nation is a Latin concept that evolved in Europe and acquired present meaning and prominence in modern times. What I'm trying to, describe here, how the Ethiopian, reconcile this, that, as you know, one only nation was dominating all the time. And then Abiy also, after this 2008, whatever we call it, revolution or reform, he took, the power. Still, Ethiopia is struggling this. So how Ethiopia reconcile, on one side being, all this nation and nationality, and the other side to apply this nation-state concept and model inherited from Europe?
The Ethiopia has experimented with several different forms of reconciling state and nation over the last half century after the overthrow of the emperor. The Derg had a very unitarist conception in which the idea of diversity, diverse nations, nationalities, and peoples was subordinate to the overall identity of Ethiopians, which was enforced by force. The EPRDF and its constitution was an interesting adaptation of the Marxist-Leninist Soviet model of a federation adapted from the Soviet Union. And it defined its nations and nationalities according to a formula that was very much appropriate for or inspired by the idea of agrarian nationalisms. So you had territorial nations and nationalities defined according to their language, their cultural identity, and their territory. Now, the problem with this, the fundamental problem with this, is that as Ethiopia developed in the contemporary world, as it industrialized, as it grew richer, that those identities had to be malleable. Territories had to be permeable in order to accommodate the sort of social, economic transformations and cultural transformations that went along with modernization. And the old and the system as enshrined in the EPRDF 1995 constitution needed to have flexibility built into it, and it didn't. And that meant that the grievances, both real and perceived, against those who dominated the system, built up into popular pressures for democratization, which pulled in completely different directions. There was the Oromo push for we as the Oromo nation should be elevated to our proper position within the polity. And so a recognition that the federal system had gone halfway in recognizing social and cultural rights, but not political rights. And then there was a pull in the other direction associated with many who believed in unitary Ethiopia to say, let's do away with this federal system altogether. And they came into an alliance, which was, of course, intrinsically an unstable alliance. And the only thing that could hold that alliance together in a tactical manner was identifying a common enemy and being engulfed in crisis. And indeed, that was the strategy that the Prime Minister took in order to maintain his own position on top. And fast forwarding to the current situation, I think what we see now is that these fundamental issues are unresolved. They have not been addressed in the peace agreement with Tigray, other than to say the existing constitution will remain, which is something that is intrinsically saying we haven't solved this problem. This problem is still there to be solved, and the political strategy for maintaining power amidst these ongoing turmoil just has to be a divide and rule strategy, a rule of staying afloat amid turmoil without addressing these questions because of the depths of animosity and division that have been stirred up over the last few years.
Yeah, in your last, excellent article again, that entitled "Ethiopia is dangerously adrift after Tigray war." You describe here that citizen. You're talking about Ethiopia. Did not know what their ruler were up to, but they were confident. Conspiracy hatched in the palace, and party headquarters would be executed efficiently, at the time. But these days, what you are saying is, it is, nobody knows what's happening right now, and the daily, the things even by weekly, it's shifting. So, yeah. Can you shed light on the vacuum which is at the heart of power in terms of shifting pattern of survival politics?
There is a sort of paradigmatic African crisis state that we have seen in many countries, and it ranges from countries in deep crisis like South Sudan or Congo, countries in permanent crisis like Sudan, countries that are merely routinely unstable like Nigeria. And it's a pattern that if you live there, the politics changes from day to day. Every week, every 2 weeks, there's something different. There's something to excite you, that there's change afoot. You go away, you come back after 5 years, it's exactly the same. The same pattern is retained. This is a turbulent state. It's like a turbulent river where as you watch it, there's always movement, but yet somehow the structure, the riverbed never changes. So Ethiopia was in the 25 years of EPRDF, certainly in the middle part of that, was moving to something different, was moving to a more institutionalized politics. It had many problems of the authoritarian developmentalism, etc. But nonetheless, it had that element of stability and predictability. And of course, Ethiopians attributed conspiracy to what was going on in the palace and party headquarters. Now, Ethiopia is becoming an African state, or an African crisis state, I should say, pretty much like all the others. And in a way, there's a school of thought, which is, so what's the problem? Why is it a problem to be like, Congo or South Sudan. That's just how African states are. And certainly there are some decision makers, for example, in Washington, D.C., who say, well, we have perfectly good relations with these sorts of countries. Why shouldn't we have similar relation with Ethiopia? But I think that's deficient for a normative reason and an objective reason. The normative reason is we should aspire to better. We should aspire to something more democratic, more developmental. And the objective reason is that actually, when you see how a state like Ethiopia is positioned in the global order today, with a growing population, subject to climate crisis, subject to the buffeting stresses of a very volatile global economy, being pushed this way and that by global strategic players, from the Middle East to China to the United States to Russia. It's not good enough just to drift along in that tide, because as you drift, you will inevitably sink. This is not stability. It is continuity, but it is continuity of an unsustainable kind. And I'm afraid that is where I think Ethiopia is now finding itself.
Okay, I have other few questions, and with respect with the time, I'm trying to, if we can cover it. So another element I would like to ask you is 1 million people decimated, as you know. The country is on the brink of collapsing economically. What's your perspective of the permanent cessation hostilities signed in Pretoria? You say that there was an enigma in the signing itself, and the only respected is the existing constitution. Can you talk about that?
So what we have in Pretoria, the Pretoria Agreement and the Nairobi Declaration, is not really a peace agreement. It is exactly what it says, a permanent cessation of hostilities, which is a very odd thing to have, because a cessation of hostilities in the mediator's rulebook is by definition temporary. It is a truce leading to a comprehensive ceasefire, security arrangements, and political deal. And we really only have very slight indications of those latter two parts. So if there is a deal, it's a deal that we don't know. And of course, there is a lot of suspicion that there is some secret deal that's been hatched. Alternatively, and I think this is actually more likely, there hasn't been a deal hatched, and the parties are working it out as they go along, because both of them, for their different reasons, needed to stop the war. The Tigrayan side needed to stop it because they simply could not withstand the level of human losses that they were suffering, and the federal side could not sustain that level of war without the state collapsing. As we know, there are many within the ruling party and the military who said, well, we didn't have a problem with human resources. We may have lost 254,000 soldiers dead over the course of 2 years, plus many hundreds of thousands more militia. But we could carry on doing this indefinitely because of our large population, over 100 million. So what was the problem? Well, the problem was that actually the country had come to a fiscal cliff where it was going to its fundamental economic viability was going to fall apart before our eyes, and that is not resolved because there is still an ongoing conflict in Oromia, which could very easily take on the same dimensions in terms of human losses and financial costs. And so the enigma is there is no political formula for getting out of this mess. All we have is an agreement not to go further down that path in the case of Tigray. And the Tigrayans who a year ago were saying that they had a broader political agenda, they had a broader set of potential coalition partners across Ethiopia. We don't see any of that now. All we see is the politics of survival.
Okay, there are also other factors that interrelated, not only internally, but there is external factor. And this morning, the rogue man, I mean, the dictator Isaias, with he was in Kenya, and some AP and Voice of America, they asked him some questions, and he was, he dodged them. Not only he dodged them, but something that it will be in the annal of the history. The way he responded, he was saying this is a factory of lies and information, and he was lecturing them as he does always in Sawa, when he was training all those people. So my question is to you is, in this Pretoria agreement, there was a three main element there. I mean, there are many of them. One is the Amharas, and then the Eritreans, to leave, but still they, we are not 100% sure whether they left or not. And the second is within Tigray, there is a political, the civic society or other elements that want power. Even this morning, I was hearing that they're trying to, to set up a transitional government. Can you also relate it to that? And with respect of the time, I mean, I don't want to put all this, but in the role of the AU, and then you see the hatchet, what you say, behind the doors of the TPLF, and how on earth we forget it, the question of genocide, the question of ethnic cleansing, the 1 million people are, massacred. Can you talk about
There's
that?
some really key points that you raised. The first is about Eritrea. So Eritrea was not mentioned in the agreement, but there was a clear indication that Eritrean troops had to withdraw from Tigray. But it wasn't specified whether this was all of Tigray, for example, Western Tigray, or not. It also, of course, the withdrawal of ground forces from places like Shire and Aksum is only part of the story. There is also the presence of Eritrea throughout Ethiopia, the penetration of Ethiopian intelligence and security agents, commercial agents, most of them operating illicitly, trainers in Addis Ababa, in Bahir Dar, and elsewhere. And this is completely not addressed. So the way in which the Ethiopian political apparatus has become integrated in a subordinate role to the Eritrean one as a whole was not addressed in this agreement, and that's one of the major shortcomings of it. The role of the African Union, I mean, it's very striking that if you look at let me just give one example. If you look at the protocol that set up the Peace and Security Council some 20 years ago, it's very clear that the Peace and Security Council is the one to take responsibility for all these matters. And it is the role of the Commission, including the chairperson, to support that. But what has happened is it's the other way around in this. It is the Peace and Security Council is only there to applaud the decisions made by the Commissioner and his High Representative. And that also allows this process to go on without the obligatory scrutiny of the mandated institutions of the African Union. And it also allows the process to go on without any formal reporting, any transparency, and any window to the United Nations as well.
Yes.
The AUPSC is obligated to work in partnership with the UN Security Council when there is a threat to international peace and security, and of course with the role of Eritrea, it is internationalized. Then within the two other quick points, within Tigray itself, the status of the government is indeterminate because the TPLF said that it was fighting for the recognition of the government of Tigray that was formed by the September 2020 elections. Now, it abandoned that position, but it didn't, in the peace talks, it was the first thing it did. But it didn't actually then specify what form of government would then come in, given that it had decided it would abandon that claim to legitimacy. And the Tigrayans quite understandably say, well, there are many other Tigrayans who are not represented by TPLF. Many fought with the Tigray Defense Forces, made enormous sacrifices, and the diaspora gave huge support. To what? To what end? And then lastly, your point about accountability. We've known all along that the federal government did not want any investigation or any accountability for these gross violations that have been perpetrated during the course of the war. And it did everything it could to shut down independent journalists, independent investigations at the UN, and so on. And in the last few weeks, it has continued its efforts to shut down the UN Committee of Human Rights Experts. Now, what's striking is that the Tigrayan leadership, which during the war had made a repeated point of saying, we insist on accountability, has just fallen silent on this issue. So, of course, that doesn't take the issue off the agenda. On the contrary, the civil society in Tigray, in Ethiopia, in the region, and globally are pushing for accountability, and quite rightly so, because if these abuses are allowed to go without investigation, without accountability, without punishment, then the future is not only for Ethiopia, but for Africa as a whole is dark indeed.
As you know, Mr. We have only a few minutes left. I want to address this question, which is key for all this, for my interview today, which is the international, donor role, especially the US and the EU and in general. They are the only one, as you also put it in your paper, and I've seen a lot of scholars, arguing along that line, that the only people who can change, Abiy's mind is the pressure from there. What will be the role of the international community? And the last question is, just added to that, Ethiopia right now, there was a three revolution that Ethiopia happened, they say. 1974, during Haile Selassie time, which is the reform of the land. And then the second one was during EPRDF, which is self-determination, as you say. It's only on the paper. And then last one now, what is going on within the church? Can you talk on those two with the respect of the time we have, please?
Okay. On the question of the church, there's not much that I can say, really, other than to say that the Orthodox Church is the real custodian of the authenticity, the legitimacy of the Abyssinian unitarist tradition. Mm-hmm. And for Abiy to take it on is a very bold and very dangerous move, because it is slow to mobilize, slow to anger, but once it is mobilized, it will be very, very difficult for it to be calmed down. Remind me of the other question.
The other question is just the donors, the donors and the role they can play.
There is of course, an irony in the position that Abiy is taking, many ironies. And the big irony is that he's saying to the donors, we don't want your influence. On the other hand, he's saying, but we need your money. And he will go running to the donors for their money, but he doesn't want any strings attached. And then the sort of the particular sharp manifestations of this happen in the case of the humanitarian assistance and rehabilitation assistance to Tigray. And then we give just two examples. One is that we know that Tigray needs a huge amount of assistance for its people to be fed, to get medicine, etc., etc. And that is only trickling in now. The efforts have been very, very half-hearted at best. Something is happening, but not a great deal. And we know from every past experience, in every crisis in Ethiopia, around the world, that the chief resource for rebuilding a shattered community is the people themselves. And so that is where the assistance should go directly. And there seems to be remarkably little effort by the donors or by even the Tigrayan authorities to make sure this happens. Now, obviously, there's a reason why the federal government would want to channel this money. But then there is a very specific issue which is going to arise, which is that in Tigray, as indeed in all of Ethiopia, over the last 30 years, hundreds of millions of dollars of donor assistance went into infrastructure, into hospitals, health centers, schools, roads, water systems, agriculture, etc. And what we have seen in Tigray is for 2 years, the government, the federal forces, destroyed and looted that infrastructure, along with the Eritreans. Now, there's going to be big questions asked by let's say, I'm talking to you from the United States. The American taxpayers are going to say, or the British taxpayers who funded the water supplies in Mekelle and Adigrat, the Americans who, through USAID or through the Bill Gates Foundation or the Clinton Foundation and all these foundations funded the healthcare system, they're going to say, we paid for all this, all these assets. You stole them and destroyed them. And you are asking us to give the money to you to rebuild what you destroyed and stole. And they're going to say no. And I think legitimately so. I'm all in favor of African solutions and the control of national resources, including aid resources, being in the hands of national authorities. But when you are rewarding those who have mounted a campaign of destruction by filling their pockets again, I don't think that's going to be acceptable.
So what will be, as for the Ethiopians, what will be your message in order to find a lasting solution? And on that, we will conclude, with all your respect.
I think the immediate solution is that the resources for rehabilitation and humanitarian assistance need to go directly to the people, to the civil society organizations in Tigray and elsewhere. And international NGOs also can play a role in that. None of it should go through government. And I think on that basis, as the communities, as the people begin to get some confidence and some autonomy from those authorities that have not served them, then it will be possible for there to be a form of national dialogue which is not controlled by those in authorities, is not steered by the political expedience of those in power.
Mr. Alex, I don't have a word, but thank you so much again for your time, to give us your valuable time and for this insight information. And on that, thank you again and have a good day, sir.
Thank you. You're very welcome.
Thank you.